F.E.A.R is one of those games where whenever it's brought up in conversation, the legacy it left on the industry is always mentioned. However, what is also mentioned when talking about F.E.A.R is the massive fumble that the series would eventually go down, which seems to mainly be blamed on a change in publisher. Now, I have never played F.E.A.R before making this video, and honestly it wasn't a game I was necessarily itching to play. I only really decided to play it because it's a small game and I didn't want to download one of the bigger games on my backlog and have to wait. So it really did come as a shock to me at how much I was sucked in with this game's story, atmosphere and gameplay. Now, before getting into the gameplay, let's first talk about the development of the game and its DLCs. There isn't much here to talk about, but what is here is worth at least mentioning. F.E.A.R was developed by the legendary and now dead Monolith Productions and published by Vivendi Games. However, the DLCs were instead developed by Timegate Studios. It's not super important for this video, but in 2008 Warner Bros would acquire the publishing rights to F.E.A.R and completely decanonize the DLC stories. From what I've seen online, F.E.A.R fans hate Warner Bros for this decision, as particularly F.E.A.R Extraction Point was very well received, and F.E.A.R 2 completely abandons these storylines. Anyway, how about we talk about the gameplay? And quite honestly, I'm not too sure where I should begin. This game is just so good. I guess I'll start with the graphics. For a game that came out in 2005, it looks really good. And I think that's mostly due to two things, the lighting and the particle effects. The game genuinely has some of the best dynamic lighting I have ever seen. I mean, just look at these examples on screen. This was ray tracing before ray tracing was even invented. The particle effects, particularly in slow motion, are still gorgeous even today. However, there is an unfortunate bug where if you're doing more than 60 FPS, your particle effects in slow-mo are going to spaz out and completely blind you. Speaking about frame rate, this game does have a hard time with some modern hardware, causing your frames to go into the shitter. Fortunately, there is a fan-made patch you can install that fixes the issue, but due to the patch boosting your frames, it causes the aforementioned particle effects bug. To fix this, all you have to do is turn your VSync on, then your game should run at a steady 60 FPS and fix the particle effects. However, I didn't know to turn on VSync until after I beat the base game, so a lot of my gameplay still has this bug in it. Now, moving on to the actual gameplay itself, the best way I can describe this game is that it tries to be an action movie with its gunfights, but with the general atmosphere of levels and the story that it tells, it's also a psychological horror. I think that the game's combat still holds up really well to this day. The guns, slow-mo and melee combat system all feel really nice. I was especially surprised at how smooth the melee combat felt. For those that don't know, F.E.A.R has a melee system where you're able to do two different types of jump kicks and a slide kick. All these melee attacks feel really smooth to do. I can sometimes feel like the game didn't read your inputs correctly, causing you to just do a normal melee attack instead. Enemies are also really fun to fight. Even though you are fighting the same enemy type for most of the game, it never really feels like it due to how smart they are. And I'm serious when I say these guys are smart. They will try to flank you when they think it's necessary and will rush you when they think you're behind cover to reload. The game also seems to know just the right times to throw in some of the heavier units just to keep the combat encounters fresh without overwhelming you. When it comes to the horror side of the game, these sections can be very hit or miss. Where I thought the game's horror really shined were sections where it was trying to build an atmosphere more than actually trying to scare me. However, I think that the game's jump scares are a little outdated, and from memory only one actually got me. The only other time I got genuinely jump scared wasn't even from the game trying to scare me, it was from an NPC I was escorting being right behind me when I turned around after I'd paused the game to go take a shit. Alright, back. Fuck, I forgot she was following me, that scared the actual fuck out of me. Anyway, enough about the gameplay, how about we talk about the story. Starting off with the base game story, you play as a F.E.A.R operative known only as Point Man. F.E.A.R is an acronym for First Encounter Assault Recon and is an elite unit in the US Army that tackles paranormal threats to national security. The game is set in the year of our Lord 2025 in the fictional city of Fairport and begins with us as the newest member of the unit. We are told at the beginning of the game that a facility owned by the company ArmorCam is under attack by a psychic named Paxton Fettel who's gone rogue. Whilst on the surface ArmorCam is an aerospace and medical research company, you quickly learn that behind the scenes they were experimenting on making a clone army known as replicas that were telepathically controlled by one person, Fettel being their commander. With this being a serious threat, a 3-man F.E.A.R unit is sent to kill Fettel, which will shut down the rest of the replicas. Soon after the mission begins, Point Man starts to have very powerful hallucinations of Fettel and a girl in a red dress named Alma, heavily implying that Point Man has a psychological link to Fettel. Not long after this starts happening, F.E.A.R is redeployed to the ArmorCam headquarters where a Delta Force team is standing by to assist you. Delta Force is essentially this game's version of the normal army. Point Man eventually learns that this isn't the first time Fettel has used his abilities to kill people within ArmorCam. The first time this happened, Fettel was just 10 years old in an incident called the First Synchronicity event, which eventually led to the termination of the cloning program called Project Origin. Point Man then eventually finds a survivor named Aldous Bishop who tells F.E.A.R that the replicas are looking for a head researcher named Harlan Wade. You help Aldous to a Delta Force helicopter for extraction, but as he is boarding, he is shot by ArmorCam security. Around this time, Point Man also learns that Fettel is the second prototype for Project Origin. Point Man also learns that the prototypes were made from the genetic code of Alma, who was also a very powerful psychic and was forced to give physical birth to both prototypes. He also learns that the synchronicity event was caused by Alma forming a telepathic link with Fettel while she was in a coma and began influencing his actions. We also find out that Harlan Wade is trying to free Alma from stasis in the Origin facility. Around this time, Point Man has another intense hallucination with Fettel, telling him that he is the first prototype. After this hallucination, you find Fettel and kill him, leaving all the replica soldiers dormant. We then get to see Wade free Alma from stasis and killing him, then we head to the Origin facility's nuclear core with the goal of overloading it. After the facility blows up, you escape on a Delta Force chopper with some of your fellow F.E.A.R operatives. Then the helicopter loses power and you see Alma climb into the cabin and the game ends. After the credits, however, we hear a phone call between the ArmorCam CEO and an unnamed senator, with the senator complaining about how indiscreet the cleanup was. But the CEO assures the senator that the good news is that the first prototype, as in you, your character, was a complete success. My overall thoughts on the base game story are very positive. This is exactly the type of storytelling I like to see in horror games. All the twists and turns this game goes down, where answers to questions just lead to more questions, just gives me a big storytelling bonner. This also, combined with the game's atmosphere that I mentioned earlier, are just the cherry on top. It is really easy to see why a lot of people consider this game Monolith's magnum opus. Now, as of writing this part, I haven't played the DLCs yet, and I know that the DLCs for this game aren't considered canon anymore, but I am really excited to see where this story goes, so I'll be back when I finish Extraction Point.
Don't pee on the floor, use the Commodore.
Holy shit. I think Extraction Point may be better than the base game. This DLC, despite having a different developer, is incredibly faithful to what the base game was going for, and they've essentially just taken what the base game did and dialed it all the way up to 11. The story of Extraction Point continues from the base game's ending. You see Alma on the helicopter with you, then it loses power and crashes. You survive this crash and your next goal is to reach an extraction point at a nearby hospital. Along the way you encounter Fettel, who seems to somehow be alive, meaning the replicant soldiers are no longer dormant. You also see a lot of Alma, but this time around she seems to be helping you for some reason. Also, there are characters from the base game here that I didn't mention in my base game part of this video, mainly because they weren't important to the overall story and didn't have much depth to them. In this DLC though, they do a far better job. Whilst I still don't think they're amazing characters, by the end of the DLC, I was getting invested in them. Anyway, throughout this story, these characters end up dying anyway, and the story ends with you about to board the extraction chopper, but it blows up. Now, the story does sound a little underwhelming compared to the base game, but what really brings it up is the atmosphere. I am not kidding when I say they dialed this shit up to 11. I thought it was amazing in the base game, but it's somehow even better here. Anyway, I'm gonna move on to the Perseus Mandate DLC, which from what I understand is a little underwhelming compared to the base game and Extraction Point, but we'll see how it goes.
What the hell? Oh my god!
Well, I can definitely see why a lot of people don't like this one. Everything that made F.E.A.R good in the base game and Extraction Point is just gone here, especially the lighting and atmosphere. I don't know why they would even bother touching the lighting, it was so perfect before, but now it's just overly bright and shadows seem very washed out. Randomly for one of the levels the lighting goes back to how it was in the base game and it actually looks really good, but after this level it reverts back to the washed out shadows for some reason. On top of this, the game crashes almost every level, forcing me to restart the game to fix it. I actually didn't end up beating this DLC because at the end of one of the levels I just kept crashing and couldn't figure out how to fix it. On top of this, the difficulty seems to be all over the place. In the base game it was fairly well balanced, and in Extraction Point it was a bit harder but still fair and fun. Whereas in Perseus Mandate it's easy to the point of being boring, but it does have some random occurrences of the Extraction Point difficulty sprinkled in there. The story isn't much better here either. Basically you play as a sergeant in a different F.E.A.R team than the one in the base game and are deployed on a separate mission that takes place at the same time as the base game. At the beginning of the game it is established that the senator heard at the end of the base game has sent in a man named Morrison and a group of mercenaries to secure information to something called Perseus. As far as I can tell, Perseus is never actually explained outside of some cryptic words from F.E.A.R later on in the story, but I never got that far because the game kept crashing on that one level like I mentioned earlier. Overall, I don't necessarily think this story was one that needed to be told, and can definitely see why a lot of fans see this as the first misstep in a series that seems to fumble the bag from here on out. To give my final thoughts on the game, F.E.A.R is amazing. Extraction Point improves and builds upon everything that made the base game great and makes it 10 times better. And Perseus Mandate is very disappointing, especially after beating Extraction Point. But overall, I think the base game and Extraction Point are well worth a playthrough. You could probably skip Perseus Mandate if you wanted. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Bye.